from the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Good evening, I'm Chris Mathews, and welcome to the Hardball College Tour. Tonight, our special guest, United States Senator Bernie Sanders. Well, I didn't know I was going to do this, Senator. Thank you for doing this. But I have to ask you the meaning of those lyrics to you. Woody Guthrie.
Just turns out yesterday we were in Oklahoma. Woody Guthrie means a lot to me. He was one of the great songwriters in modern American history. There's a museum in Oklahoma, Tulsa, for him. We use his song, This Land Is Your Land, at many of our rallies. And I think what he did is captured the spirit of working Americans, of poor people, in an extraordinary way. He brought together people like Ledbetter, Pete Seeger, Woody, and others to create, a whole moment for folk music in this country. An extraordinary man.
I know that you did an album.
Oh, God, please. You're using Woody Guthrie's name and my name in an album. Not a good idea, no.
Well, this is going to be serious business. The presidency of the United States, the American presidency, has 4 hats, the way I can figure it. The first hat, of course, is chief executive, responsibility over the entire federal government and its efficiency and honesty. Secondly, head of state, you represent the American people to the world and to themselves. Head of government through your legislative program. And the one I want to talk about first is commander-in-chief.
Well, you forgot one very important thing, Chris.
Go for it.
You represent the American people. Represent working people and poor people and elderly people, people who are being shafted today, who need, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, the right to have a decent standard of living and the right to know that their government is not controlled by billionaires in a corrupt campaign finance system. So one of the reasons I'm running for president, everything you said is true, is to transform American society, to take on a corrupt campaign finance system, a rigged economy, and a broken criminal justice system. So when I look at what my agenda is, it's everything that you said.
Yeah.
But it is more than that.
Let me ask you about the role of Commander-in-Chief, however. Can you see yourself, I've heard your speeches are resounding and you have a powerful message and an agenda probably clearer than most candidates have ever had. But when it comes to the job, it brings certain responsibilities you may not look for, but you're going to get.
Of course.
Sitting in the Situation Room, calling it a lethal drone strike. Can you see yourself in that position now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, I am proud of my achievement in terms of foreign policy. I've been all over the world, talked to a whole lot of people. Chris, as you well know, the most important decision that Congress made in many, many years in terms of foreign policy was the war in Iraq. Now, it's not just that I voted against the war, which was the right vote. It's not just that I led the opposition, helped lead the opposition against the war. Check out what I said on the floor of the House. Check out what I feared would happen the day after Saddam Hussein, a vicious dictator, was overthrown. Pretty good judgment. And I think when you talk about my views now on how we destroy ISIS through a coalition, through Muslim troops on the ground, I think my positions are pretty clear and, in fact, right.
How do we... how do you, as president, convince our potential adversaries and current ones that we're not a country and you're not a person to be messed with? How do you establish that? So remember, Kennedy got in trouble because the Bay of Pigs, then came the Cuban Missile Crisis. Once you look weak, then they come at you. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I accept your basic assumptions here. Obviously, anyone who knows my political history, I've taken on every special interest in this country. I am a fairly tough guy. When I was mayor of Burlington, I had to take on everybody.
Right.
I am prepared to take on Putin and everybody else. But let's back it up.
How do you let them know that?
You let them know that we have the strongest military in the world. We have a great military, and we are prepared to use that when necessary. But let me also say that I think that the kind of regime change that the United States has brought forth over many, many years has been, in many respects, counterproductive. All right? It's not just the war in Iraq and the overthrowing Saddam Hussein. That was a terrible mistake leading to where we are today. You go way back, and you talk about the overthrowing of Mossadegh. You remember Mossadegh in Iran?
All about it.
Oh, he wanted to nationalize oil there. The British were upset. The Eisenhower administration worked with him. And you know what we ended up with? Khomeini. All right? We overthrew Salvador Allende in Chile, who elected democratically. And you know what we ended up with? A lot of anti-American sentiment in Latin America. So what foreign policy is about is not just power, it is judgment. And I think we got to be a little bit careful about regime change. Hillary Clinton sees as a mentor of hers Henry Kissinger. So let me be very clear. I do not see Henry Kissinger as a mentor of mine. I think he was one of the worst secretaries of state in the history of this country.
Well, let's add to the list. Our Ben's down in Guatemala.
That's right.
Let's talk about that.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Trujillo. We had something to do with that
That's
baby.
right.
And something to do probably with Patrice Lumumba. We had a long history of... But now we have something called, as you say, regime change. So instead of unofficial or official assassination policy, we now have a regime change policy. You know, I'm looking at Libya. What did you think of that? We end up killing the leaders anyway. We got rid of Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein.
And what happened? And what happened the day after? Look, you know, Saddam Hussein, a brutal, murdering thug, no question about it. Gaddafi, equal, bad guy. So, you know, Hillary Clinton and other people worked hard. They got rid of him. He was killed. And what happened right now? ISIS now has a foothold in Libya, which can be a testing ground, an operational strength, a stronghold for them in terrorist attacks. So here's the point. All of us agree that you got a lot of bad people running countries around the world. But it's not good enough to say Assad is a terrible guy. He is. What happens the day after Assad is gone? What is the best way to transition to democracy? So on this area, I would say Hillary Clinton and I have a difference. It's not just the war in Iraq, which she supported, I opposed. It is, I am a little bit more cautious in terms of regime change.
So you're sitting in the White House and you're reading the op-ed page of the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They start the drumbeat for another regime change. You know what happened last time? Page after page, day after day,
man.
They start pounding the door and they say, we got to get...
Drums for the war in Iraq, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Right.
Initially, the American people were very nervous about that war. You remember that?
I remember it all.
And the media kept pounding, well, you got to be tough, and he's a terrible guy, and they have weapons of mass destruction. The trick is not just to understand that we got a lot of bad people around the world. The trick is to understand what happens the day after you get rid of those people. This is a lesson I think I have learned, not just from Iraq. It's a lesson I knew a long, long time ago.
Let's talk about an alternative world had you been president after 9/11. 9/11 happens. Let's not go back. I know there's really good arguments to be made that if your Secretary of State came in and said, Al-Qaeda is about to attack in the United States, you probably would have done something,
sure,
right?
Of course.
Okay, let's talk about afterwards. The president had the country united. He stood down there at ground zero. He had that firefighter right next to him. Everybody was with him. He went to Afghanistan. Would you have done that? Would you have done that?
Well, first of all, what you want is, and what I believe also very importantly, what the lesson of Iraq is, very simply, the United States of America cannot and should not be doing it alone. Can't do it alone. You need coalition. You need coalition. And especially when you're dealing with countries in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, you need people on the ground. And this is, I understand, this is tough stuff. President Obama...
What happens when nobody joins your posse?
Well,
Korea, they joined us. We had the Turks on our side. We had the South Koreans fighting on our side.
We are not the policemen of the world. We got people sleeping out on the streets a few blocks away from here. We got 29 million people who have no health insurance. We are spending more money than the next 9 countries in this world on the military. So yeah, we have got to be strong. We have got to protect our allies around the world. We have to protect ourselves from the dangers of terrorism. No ifs, buts, and maybes. But my foreign policy would be a little bit different, I think, than Secretary.
So if we don't have allies, we don't go.
Look, you're asking me a hypothetical, but in general...
No, but we have a situation now where nobody's going to help us in ISIS.
What I am telling you
It's not hypothetical, Senator. Nobody is joining us in fighting ISIS. There's nobody over there on the ground fighting.
Well, damn well better stuff working
nobody
with,
from
and that's
outside.
not quite true. That's not quite true.
We have the...
It's not quite true. You have King Abdullah of Jordan, who is making it very clear that the way you destroy ISIS is with Muslim troops on the ground, and we have got to provide air support and other types of support.
But are they there? Are the Jordanians fighting?
We have got to build that, and we are making, as you know, thank God, a little bit of progress. Now, nobody here believes that the Iraqi army has been a particularly effective fighting force. Right. But the truth is, finally, with American help, they were able to retake Ramadi. As you know, ISIS has lost 40% of the territory it controlled in Iraq over the last year. So maybe, knock on wood, we are making some
Why did we
progress.
tear apart the Iraqi army?
Well, don't ask me. I mean, ask the Bush administration. You're right. And that, so what we said to all the people in the Ba'ath Party, well, you're terrible, awful people. You're not going to lose your jobs. You're going to lose your money, right? Your income. You're not going to be able to take care of your family. And aren't we shocked?
And they all joined ISIS.
Yeah, what a shock that was.
Okay, let's talk about it. This is a tough one, and I don't have the answer. That's why I'm giving you the question, all right? Gitmo. There are people in Gitmo. We can argue about the numbers. There's numbers of men down there, men, who we are scared of. We think they're true terrorists. We know they're going to get us the minute we let them go, but we can't bring them to court for lack of evidence because they may not have committed a crime by our laws. What do we do with them?
Well, you shut down. I think the president is right. You shut down Gitmo.
But what do we do with those people?
Well,
dangerous people we can't convict.
Well, you put them in American jails and we do the best. Look.
What happens, though, when the ACLU, a good organization, comes forward and says these people deserve a trial, you have to release them? Then what happens? Because they're on U.S. territory. Isn't that what we have on Gitmo? So they're not in U.S. territory.
Well, I actually visited Gitmo. I was there. And all I can tell you is that Gitmo sends a signal to the entire Muslim world, to much of the world. The United States talks a good game about democracy. But take a look at Gitmo. They're running a prison camp. So,
well, what do you do with these guys?
I don't have all of the answers, but I do believe we should shut down Gitmo.
But if we let them go under your watch, then you're responsible for their conduct.
They're not going to go, and I'm not going to let them go and start, waging terrorist attacks against the United States. But let me get to one point. All of these issues are important, but let me get to an issue that's more important, if I might. All right? And that issue is we're going to change nothing in the United States unless we address a corrupt campaign finance system. And I'll tell you something very interesting, Chris. I go all over the country as I campaign. And you know what I find? It's not just progressives. It is conservatives, okay, who are saying, what is going on in America when you have billionaires now spending unlimited sums of money buying elections? And what this campaign is about is trying to bring about a political revolution.
Right.
Because I acknowledge in every speech that I give is that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. And you know why? Because Wall Street and corporate America and the big campaign donors and the corporate media, by the way, are so powerful that we are not going to change America unless millions of people begin to stand up and fight back. That is the most important.
Let's talk about that when we come back. I want to focus on how you would get a Supreme Court Associate Justice nominee, at least given respect by the Republican-dominated Senate, because without doing that, you can't change the court and you can't get rid of your Citizens United. We'll be right back with Senator Bernie Sanders. We're live at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics in the Hardball College Tour.
There's a lot to stop and see this President's Day at Nissan. Reinvented capabilities, enhanced safety,
back to the Hardball College Tour with Senator Bernie Sanders at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. We were talking about Citizens United, and it's a big issue for you and for the country. I agree. The question is, how do we replace the Supreme Court justice seat left by Antonin Scalia? How do you get the Republican leadership led by Mitch McConnell, who one of your colleagues, even to give a hearing? The president doesn't seem to be able to move these people.
Well, Chris, what we have, and I'm in the Senate and have been there throughout Obama's tenure, we have a level of obstructionism which I believe is unprecedented in the history of the United States. And what happened, as you know, literally on the day that Obama was sworn in as president, these guys got together and they said, all right, how do we make sure that Obama is as ineffective as possible? How do we stall? I'm there and I've seen them. We can't get an assistant, sanitation worker approved by the Senate without going through all kinds of processes. So this is just a continuation of that. And you ask me the question, what do we do about it? First of all, let me be very clear. I will do everything that I can to see that the president does make a nomination and that the United States Senate holds the hearings to either approve or disapprove. That's what the Constitution mandates. There's no debate about that, is there?
Nope.
And the idea,
Article 2 says name a nominee.
That's right.
That's his job, the president.
It is as clear as the nose on our faces. And yet these people are such obstructionists, they don't even want to give this president the right to fulfill his constitutional duty. So I will do everything that I can to make it happen. But you raise a broader question. You ask, well, what do you do about it? And I'll tell you, this is what the campaign is about. I know it's outside of mainstream thinking. Are you ready for this one, Chris?
Yes.
All right.
Well, I think I can take it.
All right, take it. I don't want anyone collapsing on me here. It is to revitalize American democracy on issue after issue. And it's not just Republican obstructionism on this issue. You have a Congress that does the bidding of the billionaire class, of the campaign donors. You know, you're there all the time. Half the members of Congress are spending their life raising money, right? And it's getting worse and worse and worse. So this is what you got to do. What you need to do is rally the American people. I'll give you an example. Raising the minimum wage. Overwhelming support for raising the minimum wage. Congress does not want to do it. Pay equity for women workers. Congress does not want to do it.
Obama can't do this, but you can. How?
I'll tell you. Well, what you need, and what I say is you need a political revolution. And that is you need these young people to understand, and working people and low-income people, if they are not involved actively in the political process, it will be the billionaire class who makes decisions for them and not necessarily in their interest.
But you get elected. Let's say you get elected. You take office next January 20th, and you walk up to the Senate and you meet with the leadership and say, I have a program here. I want to have free, government-funded tuition for public universities. There are things I want done on Social Security to increase benefits. There's things I want done on health care so it can become like Medicare for life. You've got very strong positions. Right. And Mitch McConnell looks at you the way he looked at President Obama and says, forget about it.
And then you know what I say? I say, hey, Mitch, take a look out the window. There are 1 million young people out there who don't want to be in debt for half their life for the crime of going to college. And if you want to antagonize those 1 million people and lose your job, Mitch, if you don't want to lose your job, you better start listening to what we have to say. That's the point. That's how change takes place.
Well, how do you squeeze a guy like him?
It's not him. Mitch is, I know
all
Mitch
the Republicans.
McConnell.
How do you squeeze them? 60 senators. You need 60 senators to get a court. You need 60.
Let me tell you this. Absolutely, positively, 100%. If we rally young people in this country to say, you know what, Germany, Scandinavia, other countries, they have free tuition in public colleges and universities. I have been all over this country because I've talked to kids $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in debt, paying a huge percentage of their income, okay? Young people stand up and say, we are sick and tired of it. We don't want to go in debt for our whole lives because we got a college education. You know what? We'll win that fight immediately. But the trick is not to appeal to Mitch McConnell. Right. It's to say, Mitch, take a look at your emails coming into your
What
office.
evidence do you have that this has worked for you? Have you increased the turnout in these elections?
Have
you, as a senator, been able to get 60 votes of senators for anything? Have you ever been able to do this? What you're talking about doing? You say I can get 60 senators. I am not the president of the...
Okay. What I am saying, Chris...
But what evidence do you have you can do it?
What evidence do I have?
You can do it.
The evidence that I have is that's the only way change has ever happened
I agree with you.
in this country.
That's
what the civil rights movement was about. That's what the women's movement, the gay movement...
It's necessary, but is it sufficient?
That's called,
Is it sufficient to get it done? These guys run in their own states with their own conservative constituencies that will say, fine, Bernie Sanders is a liberal president.
Let me give you an example.
He's a progressive. I'm not one. I'll vote against him.
Let me give you an example.
How do you know you can do it?
How do I know? I don't know anything. I think we do the best that we can do. We try. But let me give you an example, all right? If you and I were sitting here 10 years ago, and I said to you, you know, Chris, I think in 2015, gay marriage will be legal in every state in this country. What would you have told me? You would have told me I'd be crazy, right? Honestly. That's what you would have told me. You thinking about it?
I can't see the future.
All right.
But you're right. It moved very quickly.
It moved
The country
quickly.
moved very quickly.
It moved quickly because people in the gay community and their straight allies said, people in this country have a right to love whoever they want. And then suddenly, do you see any Republican ads?
How does this relate? How does this relate to Citizens United?
Let me answer your question. Do you see any Republican? I see all the connection.
Okay.
You're asking me. You are asking me how we make change. And I'm telling you, you make change not by sitting down with Mitch McConnell. You make change when millions of people in this country demand change. That's the way change has always taken place. Chris, it's not just, I use gay rights, which is a good example, contemporary example for these young people to understand. They think, oh, gay rights, what's the big deal? Trust me, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I voted against DOMA in 1996, that was a very difficult vote.
There's a difference.
But what about the civil rights movement? What about the women's movement? It always happens when millions of people demand change. And right now, when we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality, when the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, you know what? We do need a political revolution.
Can I offer an alternative? It seems to me that the reason that we got gay marriage, same-sex marriage, is because when we went to California, they couldn't find anybody. Ted Olson knows people. There was nobody on the other side. California didn't have a case. There was no damage done by gay marriage. And that's what happened. There were no losers. Now, what you're offering... they couldn't make a case against it. Now, what you're offering...
Hold it.
Can I continue the
agree with that. No, I don't agree with that.
Okay, go ahead.
They can't make a case. You have all of these fundamentalists.
But they didn't lose.
All of these people, millions...
They disagree, but they didn't lose.
Oh, I think they lost.
Okay, let me ask you about money. If we get free tuition, government-funded tuition here, it has to come from someone. Those people will be the one who lose. If you have larger Social Security benefits, the higher income people during their working lives will be the ones who lose. If you get into arithmetic here. So there will be tremendous forces against everything you've advocated here.
Right.
It's not like saying, nobody's staying up all night worrying about gay marriage because they're...
Okay, good point.
But this thing, they're losing money. And the interests are at work here. The very interests you've talked about are still going to be there the day after you're inaugurated.
That's right.
So what do you do with it? Don't tell me you can just wish it to happen.
Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
What you are saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is you got a very powerful billionaire class who wants it all and will resist any change.
Anyone with substantial wealth or in a 401k or a mutual fund will want to hold on to their money. They'll all want to hold on to their money.
What you're talking about is the Koch brothers in corporate America.
And everyone in the stock market.
And people who are very, very wealthy. So let me just say
anyone in the stock market.
Chris, let me just say this. Not anyone, all right?
Well, this university invests in the market.
Let me just say this, all right, if I might. All right? In the last 30 years, you know what's happened? There's been a massive redistribution of wealth. You know that?
I agree completely.
It has gone from the middle class and working families to the top 1/10 of 1%. I didn't hear the establishment moaning about how radical and crazy it was that trillions of dollars left the pockets of the middle class. Now, when I'm talking about giving the middle class a break, all these guys are...
No, you're giving a normative argument. I agree with it. The question is, how do you get it done when all these powers are arrayed against you?
Then let me...
The Finance Committee is sitting around, how do we have to raise taxes on Wall Street?
Right, what
so we
you're
do this
saying...
50-cent tax on $100. We have to get that tax passed. And then somewhere else you have to dedicate it to paying for tuition bills. These are hard things to get done.
What you are saying, let's be clear, okay? Let me be very clear. I believe that in the year 2016, a college degree today is about the equivalent of a high school degree 50, 60 years ago.
I agree with it. Normatively, you're winning the argument.
All right. So I believe that when we talk about public education, it shouldn't be first grade through 12th. It should be through college. Okay? I believe that public colleges and universities, not the University of Chicago, sorry guys, but public colleges and universities should be tuition free so that every kid in this country, look, I grew up in a family that did not have a lot of money. My parents never went to college. I want every kid in this country who has the ability to do so to go to
not going to be out the window. They may come once.
Well, you are assuming, and this is the difference between our views, you are assuming